Hello and welcome to the Frans van Cat interview. I'm Annette Young. Television, and nowadays increasingly the internet, gives us a front row seat to news as it unfolds. But on September 11, 2001, many of us found ourselves gripped to the television screen, watching with horror as New York's iconic Twin Towers came under attack. In fact, Twin Towers was the name of an Academy Award-winning documentary made a few years later, which focused on the tragic deaths of a New York police officer and a fireman who happened to also be brothers. One of the team behind the film was Australian-born and Paris-based cinematographer and director Scott Hillier, who's with me today. Scott Hillier, thank you so much for taking time out to join us.
Thank you.
First of all, I'm going to ask you that question. Where were you on that fateful day?
I was in New York City, living in New York City at the time. The beautiful, beautiful blue sky day, which turned into a very, very horrific day. Living in New York City, going to work that morning, and came out of the metro station and 40 phone calls.
Where exactly were you? Were you very close to the southern
I was up
tip?
on 72nd Street, and so I saw nothing, heard nothing, until actually I got out of the metro. And the crazy thing about it was that I was working on a series about firefighters at the time, making a television series for CBS. And I always prided myself on being at work at 6:15 every morning. But that morning I just couldn't get out of bed, and for the first time in months I took my daughter to school and sat down and had a coffee and a croissant, and very calmly and collectively went to the subway station and went to work to come up, and you know, by the time I came up the world had changed.
And what did you do when you realised what was going on?
Just because I had worked with the police department in New York City and I was working with the fire department, my first instinct was to get down there. And I had a heap of messages on my phone saying, "So where are you, man? We've got a seat ready for you. What's happening?"
These were police officers and firemen?
Firemen, yeah, because they knew that I was just upstairs. And so...
Did you grab your camera?
I raced into the office, and because I didn't know what the hell was happening, really. There's a lot of phone calls, but a plane hitting the towers. Raced in, saw the first plane go in. They were replaying it continuously on television. And I was on the phone trying to talk back to my police friends and the firefighters to see if I could get a lift down there. And I spoke to one of them, the character in my film, and a very good friend of mine, Joe Vigiano, who's just like, "Man, we're already there. Where are you? You're late. Come and meet me." And so I raced to grab the camera. I was dressed like this because we'd finished shooting. And grabbed the camera, jumped into a taxi, and headed down. But we could only get to 14th Street. They'd blocked it off from 14th Street. And me and another guy, we grabbed this camera, and we were running as fast as we can down to the
And how
towers.
far did you manage to get to?
I got within probably 6 blocks.
Were you still on the phone?
No, but by then the phones were out. The phones were out. And heard the second plane go in, didn't see it, just heard the second plane go in. And then everyone knew it wasn't just an accident, it was terrorism. And the amazing thing that sort of surprised me is that in all the horror films you see, you know, something happens to the Americans and they go histrionic and everything's bad. It was far from the case. People were walking, hundreds of thousands of people were walking away from the towers, but there was no screaming, there was no yelling, there was no anything. It was just, get out, this is New York, they can handle anything.
So tell us a little bit more about the documentary and why you decided to focus on these two men, these two brothers.
It was a very sort of curious way of how the documentary came together, because we were working with the police department for 3 or 4 months beforehand, filming Joe Vigiano, who was this sort of the NYPD's hero, shot 5 times, 34 years of age. He's a big buffhead basically, but he loved being a cop, and he was in the ESU, the Emergency Services Unit. And he just kept getting shot all the time. He just getting in the wrong place at the wrong time, and you know, taking down the bad guy, but getting shot. And we'd filmed with him for months, and we couldn't figure out what we were doing with the film and how we would do it. But you know, we saw a lot of crazy things. New York City is a crazy place, and when you're with these guys, you see people jumping out of buildings, you see people shooting. I mean, it's crazy. But anyway, so we put that to rest, and then I went to work on a series on firefighters, and so I did a lot about firefighters, and then. So I have a lot of material on both, and then on the day, of course, they both died, and then so we went back and revisited, trying to make a film, trying to make a story.
When did you realise that the two of them had died?
That night. It was. I tried to call Joey all day after phones were sorted out and we could get phones through. And at 5 o'clock, his phone answered. And I was just like, my heart was just like, yes. And an EMT worker says, "Hi, I'm an EMT worker, and I found this telephone."
And you knew then?
And that was gone.
So how long did it take for you to come to the realisation that the way to make a film was to focus on him and his brother?
Good stories deal with good characters, and this is for me it's a horrifically sad and sorry film because I lost two people that I knew very, very well, but their story is the perfect sort of example of what happened that day. The fact that firemen, I've spent a long time with firemen, and New York City firemen, they believe they're the toughest and the best, and they've got in their locker rooms, you see, if they sent us to hell, we'd put the fires out, and there's no way that they weren't going to march up those stairs and try and put those fires out. And the emergency services unit, that's their job. They're the tip of the spear. And I knew they were going to be there. Was
it difficult working on this film, given that you knew these two people?
To be honest, by the time the film was actually made in the edit suite, to be honest, because we'd shot all the material and then, there's some material from me down there on the day. But it's just heart-wrenchingly sad when you go back and you talk to very brave, tough individuals who trying to talk about that day or talk about their friends who died. That's the bit that sort of messes with you a little bit.
Looking back at the documentary, for you, what was the most powerful image that was part of the film?
The bit that gets me all the time is I filmed Joey getting a medal about 4 months before the end of it, and he got a medal for being shot again. And he had one of his young sons, and just gave him a big cuddle. And that's the bit for me. And he just had a baby a couple of months before as well.
Have you kept in touch with the family?
Well, I mean, we do. I go back and see his grave every time I go back to New York City. And I've kept in touch with his wife. I'll call her on the night. So.
What was so different about the coverage of 9/11 compared to other big news events previously?
Changed the world. It honestly changed the world. I always say as soon as I got out of that subway, the world had changed.
I mean, you've covered wars and you know the news media industry, but to you, what was it that made it?
Well, because it's so unbelievable. I still look at the picture behind you there and don't see the towers, and that to me is unbelievable. And I've travelled a lot, I've been to a lot of places, but everybody can tell you where they were that day. And I think, it's landmark in the fact that it's changed it. I think what's happened since, the way that it's been used since, the words 9/11 sort of are synonymous with so many things now. They lose
it's
the
a day
impact.
that defined a decade, isn't it?
Well, I think our generation. I think in 50 years' time, we'll still be able to talk about where you were on 9/11.
We've seen a lot of documentaries, there's been books, there've been some films, but there hasn't really been the definitive Hollywood blockbuster about the events on that day. Why do you think that's the case?
I think it's too close. It's too close to them. And everyone has their own take on it. And it's sort of quite sacrilegious, I think, at the time. There have been films made, I don't think any great ones, but you'd have to be a pretty brave filmmaker to sort of say, this is the way it's going to be, and to pick the angle and what you do, I don't really know.
As a documentary filmmaker and given your involvement in the media, one thing we've seen since that day is an explosion of documentaries. Now we have the event of the YouTube generation, as you pointed out, which we are still part of, despite the age. Yeah. Is there still a place for documentaries?
It's getting tighter, it's getting harder, just because people's attention span is 2 minutes now, 2 minutes, 3 minutes. But I don't believe all is lost, because there are still very intelligent people out there doing things, but I think it's the way that how we deliver them and how we tell the stories. We have to keep on telling very good stories, and I think you don't have to do it quick. You don't have to appeal to everybody to actually tell your story. So I know it's hard and it's basically impossible to get funding for good documentaries, but we've got to keep trying. It's just like writing the definitive novel or writing a great book. It's different than an article you read in the Metro magazine. So I hope that they won't forget it. The younger generation, the YouTubers, I hope that you can actually interest them and just tell a story and say, look, this is it, watch it, you're going to be better off for it.
Does your family, do your children watch that documentary at 9/11? What do they walk away from when they watch it?
Towers fall down, everyone dies. I think the thing about it, it is emotive. It's a real story. It's a
so
true story.
documentaries can be a piece of art, can they?
There's no doubt. For me, they are. I think if done well, they are a piece of art. They can take you high, it can take you low. But again, it's the whole idea. It's a real story. You don't turn it off and sort of think about something else. I mean, a good documentary of the Twin Towers, people talk about it. There's very few people that I know that can watch it without crying their eyes out. And I think you've got to do that to remember these events and remember the people. I mean, again, it's all characters, and unfortunately, the characters in our film died. But my goodness, they were doing something really good, and it's a great story.
Scott Hillier, I'm afraid that's all we have time for. Thank you so much for coming in. And that's it for this edition of the Frans van Kat interview. Stay tuned for more news and headlines, which are coming up shortly.